Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, I wanted to take this time to speak with someone who may be struggling and going through some things. You already know I'm coming to you with the inspirational video because that's my job. That's what I'm called to do, to inspire, to speak the truth, to love on, and to tell the truth, right? And to help somebody to be able to help somebody else. So I know you're looking at the title of this message. What is this girl talking about now? Yes. So I know that my title is Know Your Opponent, and I just want to know if you really, truly, honestly know who your opponent is. And the reason why I ask this question is because most people think that their opponent is their exes. They think that their opponent is their bosses. They think that their opponent is their trauma. Not to mention, let's talk about the haters, right? We think that our opponents are our haters. And sometimes when we get caught up in things that causes us to have to endure systemic issues, we think that it's the system. But I want you to take some time out to really think about this, right? The real opponent is often our unhealed trauma, right? The false beliefs that we continue to tell ourselves, those emotional triggers. You know how you're going through something and then something trigger you and you become so emotional and you can't even understand where it's coming from. Those Our opponent often becomes spiritual warfare, right? We don't even look at that. We look beyond the spiritual aspect of it, right? Our opponents, the real opponent, is our self-sabotaging behaviors and patterns. We do not take a look at these things, right? Most people often find their opponents to be the wrong things. You think your opponent is your circumstance, right? You think your opponent is the people who have hurt you. But what if I told you you've been fighting the wrong battle? Do you hear me? What if I told you that you have been fighting the wrong battles? If you don't know who your opponent is, I'm telling you, listen to me when I tell you this. You will lose yourself to patterns you can't even see. Remember, I talked about that self sabotage? hmm What I need you to understand is that the Bible says in Ephesians 6:12, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. And if you want to go deep into the scripture, please read Ephesians 6:11 and 12. The Bible tells us that we are to put on the full armor of God. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness in heavenly places, right? And I'm paraphrasing this. The opponent is not always a person. Our opponents can be our trauma responses, those fight, flight, or freeze or fawn responses, right? Unhealed trauma, what it can do, it can make us who are safe feel unsafe. Silence feels like rejection. Correction feels like abandonment. That's not a weakness, that's wiring. What am I saying? Our false core beliefs, those thoughts that we continue to tell ourselves, those self-sabotaging beliefs that we and patterns that we continue to tell ourselves is I'm not good enough. People gonna always leave me. If I relax and I become comfortable, right? Everything is just gonna fall apart. These battles, these beliefs, they operate subconsciously. What do? They influence how you date. They influence how you work, how you respond to your stress. I need you to understand that spiritual warfare is real. See, the enemy, He doesn't come to destroy you. He just needs to distract you. And if you go back to my previous video, I talked about how we have to remove distractions. If we are not careful, we will find ourselves being distracted by the wrong things. And then when we look up, it's like, wait a minute, what happened? Where did the time go? Or how did I lose this, that, and the third, right? And we have to pay attention to our opponent. Our opponent becomes that confusion. Our opponent becomes that shame, that self isolation. When you find yourself drawing back away from people, our opponent becomes fear. But what we need to do, and which I believe, and this is my personal belief, what I believe we purpose to do, what we fail to do is study our opponent. Why? Why do we study our opponent? Why? Because we are fighting the wrong things. The Bible clearly tells us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. So instead of fighting the spirit man, instead of fighting the spirit being, what happens is we begin to fight each other. We look at people upside their head, we judge people, we say these things about ourselves and others. We can't even see beyond the surface. And if we take some time to think about it, I want to say something to you. If we're looking at, and for those of you who watch the Bears, right? Those of you who watch football, right? We know that athletes, even basketball, they study film, right? They study film. Soldiers, what do? They study strategy, right? So here it is. I'm going through I'm trying to fight my opponent. I really don't know who my opponent is. But once I find out who my opponent really is, I have to take time to study my own strategy. How? You may say, you know what, Leisha, how do I study my strategy? How do I study my opponent? Just like teams study film before the Super Bowl, we got to understand that we too have to study our own strategies. See, what happens is when we become self-aware, self-awareness creates a strategy. So you got to begin to ask yourself some questions. When you cannot understand who your opponent is, you got to ask yourself, what triggers me repeatedly? Because see, a lot of us, we don't know what our triggers are. We just know that we get triggered. We got to ask ourselves some serious, hardcore questions, whether we like it or not. And we got to spend some time strategizing. Ask ourselves, what situations make me overreact? Because a lot of times it's not who's saying what to us, it's how they're saying it that reminds us of that thing or that person that we had experienced trauma with, right? So then what happens is we start to shut down. And now we got to ask ourselves, why am I shutting down? When do I shut down? What lies do I rehearse in my head that commands me to continue to self sabotage over and over and over in my head? I need you, sister or brother, to understand that healing starts when you stop judging your responses and start studying them. It goes back to strategizing. It goes back to me focusing in on my strategy because right now I'm about to go to war. I got to understand that I got to move myself out of the way and I got to begin to focus. Because you know what? Your reaction is information. It's not condemnation. I don't think you heard me. Your reaction is information. It's not condemnation. See, when we look at it this way, what it does, it positions us, right? It positions us to feel safe. It positions us to feel wise. It positions us to feel grounded and not preaching, right? So, how do I practice these steps? What keeps me identifying these patterns in my life, the repeated cycles? You got to ask yourself these serious questions, right? Because we got to, number one, we got to identify the pattern. What keeps repeating in my life? You know what? I say this. We get so familiar with certain things. We get comfortable with certain things. We get comfortable with certain patterns. And what happens is we start to repeat a vicious cycle over and over and over and over again. And if we are not careful, we will continue to fall or fail at something because we are not taking a step back to say, what is it that's causing me to repeat these same vicious cycles in my life? Familiarity, it feels right, right? That's a familiar spirit. Now, what has to happen? We know, number one, we identify the pattern. Now, number two, we got to track the trigger. How do I track my triggers? You know what? You ever be in a conversation with your significant other, or maybe it's a friend that you are in a friendship with, and they say something, and then it triggers you, and you can't even understand where this anxiety is coming from. You can't even understand what the heck is taking place. Why am I feeling so emotional right now? Right? Sometimes we got to take a step back and we got to journal about these things, right? We got to ask ourselves what happened? What did I feel? What did I tell myself to make myself feel this way? And number three, we got to replace the lies. Remember I talked about those self sabotaging patterns? Those things that we continue to tell ourselves over and over and over again. I'm not good enough. I'll never be enough. Or, you know what? If I try to do this, I'm going to fail at it. If I try to do this, I won't succeed, right? We got to replace those lies. So if I'm telling myself I'm not safe, I got to tell myself I am safe. If I'm telling myself I'm not enough, I gotta tell myself I'm good enough. If I'm telling myself that I ain't gonna make it, I ain't gonna survive, I gotta tell myself I am going to make it. I will survive. I am above and not beneath. I am a lender and not a borrower. We got to continue to tell ourselves these things to shift the lie because that's all they are. So, what do? We change our way of thinking by strategizing against our opponent. When you know your opponent, you know what you do? You stop fighting people and you start breaking patterns. Stop telling yourself that you're crazy because you're not crazy. No, you are not weak. You are not any of that. You may just be, and I'm saying this with love, care, and concern. Maybe it's that you are unhealed. That's why you continue to be triggered. That's why not only that, but you keep repeating these same self-sabotaging patterns over and over and over again. But you got to start to change the way that you think. Because you know what? Healed people, they win battles differently. Healed people win battles differently. I'm sorry that I rambled on and on and on. I need you to understand, if you don't get nothing else out of this video, please understand that you are not in this alone, right? You are not sometimes you know what? We become our own worst enemy. And that is why it is so imperative for us to understand who our battles are against. Remember, Ephesians 6:12 says, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness in heavenly places. And I'm paraphrasing that. So figure out who your opponent is. Start to strategize and change things because, again, as I always say, Change comes from within. If this video has helped you in some way, I want to challenge you to like, share, and subscribe to this channel, right? So that you can be alerted, right, with new videos. Somebody may be in need to hear this. Maybe it's not you fighting your opponent or not knowing who your opponent is. Maybe it's someone who is struggling every day of their lives and they don't know if they're coming or going. All they know is that they're going through a depression and they continue to self sabotage and continue to repeat the same vicious cycles. I want to challenge you. Yes, you, my sister or my brother, to share this. Help somebody else out. Stop being selfish. It's not just about you. We in a community to help each other. And if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, please feel free to drop. Or maybe you got some encouraging words to say to me. You know, I want to challenge you to please, whatever you do, leave me a comment down below and say, I will continue to heal and not self sabotage. Type that down below. Until we meet again in the next video. Bye.